All right, let's dive in. Today we're going to unpack the world of Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan.
And his super popular podcast.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Yes, the Joe Rogan Experience. We've got some great stuff to dig into.
Yeah, we do.
We've got an article with some of his top episodes from this year.
Oh, cool.
And his Wikipedia page, of course.
Gotta have that.
And an analysis of Rogan and just how much his show has impacted, everything. I'm excited about this one.
I am too, because his podcast is like a cultural powerhouse, right?
Huge.
But he's also been involved in like a lot of controversies.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
So before we get into the podcast itself, I think it'd be good to kind of lay the groundwork.
Yeah.
Who is this guy?
Yeah, who is Joe Rogan? It's funny, actually, his path to where he is now.
Yeah.
Like this level of influence.
Right.
Wasn't a straight line at all.
Okay.
So he's kind of like,
he's done so many different things.
Yeah.
He's what they call multi-hyphenate, right? Which is like, you see it a lot in entertainment, where someone kind of wears a lot of different professional hats.
Oh, that makes sense.
Not just sticking to one lane.
So they're like an actor / comedian / writer / all those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Rogan's journey definitely reflects that,
Okay.
He was born in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay.
Back in '67.
All right. So like a Jersey boy.
Jersey boy through and through.
Yeah.
And his childhood was, a little rocky.
Oh, okay.
But he found a passion in martial arts.
Really?
Yeah, he actually was like a Taekwondo champion.
Wow. I did not know that about him.
Yeah, he took home the U.S. Open Taekwondo Championship.
That's pretty serious.
Yeah, as a lightweight.
So it seems like that early experience with discipline and kind of pushing himself,
Totally.
it really set the stage for like his whole approach to everything.
To life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So after college, he really explored a bunch of different avenues,
Okay.
stand-up comedy, acting.
I mean, he was even a UFC commentator.
Right. You name it. It's like he was testing the waters.
Figuring out what he liked.
Exactly. Figuring out what clicked.
Yeah.
And one of the sources mentioned this really cool story
Okay.
from his early stand-up days in Boston.
Okay.
He convinced a comedy club owner to give him like a 5-minute spot.
Just out of the blue.
Yeah, just on a whim.
Wow.
And that night, he met his future manager.
No way.
Yeah, Jeff Sussman.
That's amazing.
Let's talk about a lucky break.
What a lucky break. It sounds like he was always like hustling.
Oh, yeah.
Just putting himself out there.
Definitely. That's great. And that hustle would come in handy when he launched the Joe Rogan Experience.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Okay.
So 2009,
2009.
the Joe Rogan Experience is born.
It begins.
Right. But it was a much different show back then, right?
Right. For sure. Super low-key.
Yeah.
It was just him and his friend, Brian Redband, just having like casual conversations, streaming live on Ustream.
Really?
Yeah. It's crazy to think about now, considering how big the production is these days.
And like the guests he gets now?
Exactly. A-listers, big names.
Wild, right.
It is. It's really wild.
But it just shows you how far he's come.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
So the podcast gains traction, obviously.
It gains traction, for sure.
Climbs the iTunes charts, which, back then was like the thing.
Yeah, it was the big thing.
And then SiriusXM picks it up.
Yep.
And then, of course, the huge Spotify deal.
A big one.
In 2020.
2020, yeah.
Yeah, it was a game changer.
It was a game changer.
$200 million.
For exclusive rights. It really shook things up.
The whole podcasting world.
The whole podcasting world.
And it really, I think, solidified Rogan's position as like a major media figure.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And then in 2024, just this year.
Oh, wow.
He renewed his deal with Spotify for an estimated $250 million.
Still a ton of money.
It is. It is.
Although his show isn't exclusive to Spotify anymore.
Right. That's the change this time around.
So what do you think? What is it about this podcast that draws in millions of listeners every month?
One of the most interesting things about the Joe Rogan Experience is just how many different topics he covers.
He really does go all over the place.
He does. And it really reflects his own diverse interests.
Okay.
Right? Which, you've got comedy and martial arts to like science, philosophy, and even politics.
Oh, yeah.
He's created this space where like no subject is off limits.
Right. It's kind of like an intellectual free-for-all.
Exactly. It really is.
So it's not just like listening to Joe Rogan riff about random stuff.
No, not at all.
There's actual substance there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think that unpredictable format, like you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
That's a big part of the appeal.
Okay.
Like, you're constantly learning and being exposed to new ideas.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's break down some of those key themes a little bit.
Okay.
We've got comedy, of course, which makes sense.
Right, with his background.
He's a stand-up comedian.
Makes sense.
But it's not just about telling jokes, right?
Right. He really gets into, like, the creative process.
Oh.
The craft of comedy, and the lives of comedians themselves.
So he has a lot of other comedians on the show.
Tons of them.
Yeah.
And those conversations tend to be, well, hilarious, obviously.
I would imagine.
But also, like, insightful.
Oh, okay.
And often surprisingly candid.
So it's like he's using his platform to, like, give us a peek behind the curtain of the comedy world.
Exactly.
Very cool.
And then you've got the science and philosophy side of things.
Okay, that's a little more unexpected, I guess.
It is, but it's super fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rogan has this, like, insatiable curiosity about consciousness, like what makes us human, He loves to talk about things like psychedelics, sensory deprivation tanks, and, like, even the nature of reality itself.
Whoa.
Like, he asks the big questions.
Yeah.
And he brings on guests who, like, challenge conventional thinking.
So it's not just the mainstream, like, scientific viewpoint.
Not always, no.
Okay.
He likes to push the boundaries a bit.
I can see how that would be appealing to people.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is.
It's like he's encouraging people to, like, think outside the box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the current events and politics.
Oh, right.
Which, has become a really prominent part of the show.
Right.
Rogan's not afraid to tackle controversial topics.
Yeah.
And he's interviewed some major political figures.
Like he's had Bernie Sanders on.
Bernie Sanders.
And Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Actually, his interview with Elon Musk back in 2018.
The one where you smoked weed.
That's the one. It's one of the most watched episodes of all time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I can see why it was everywhere.
Oh, yeah. It went viral.
But they covered a lot of interesting ground in that episode, too.
Oh, they did. They talked about Tesla and SpaceX, of course.
And Mars colonization.
Mars colonization, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And even, like, the potential dangers of artificial intelligence.
Which, a lot of people are talking about these days.
Right. So it's a great example of how Rogan can blend, like, entertainment with these really thought-provoking discussions.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we've talked about Rogan's wide range of interests.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to really get a sense of, like, the scope of his show, we should talk about some of the other, like, intriguing guests he's had on.
All right, let's do it. Yeah. Well, one that immediately comes to mind is Edward Snowden.
Edward Snowden, wow.
Yeah, the former CIA employee who leaked classified information about the NSA's surveillance programs.
Okay.
So his conversation with Rogan was like a rare glimpse into the world of government surveillance.
Oh, wow.
And the ethical questions around national security.
Right, because that was a huge deal when it happened.
It was.
Yeah.
Snowden actually said something in that episode that really stuck with me.
What was it?
He said, saying that you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide.
Oh, I've heard that before.
It's like saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say.
That's a good one.
Right.
It really makes you think about how important privacy is.
Exactly.
Even if you think you've got nothing to hide.
It applies to everyone.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Edward Snowden.
Edward Snowden.
Who else?
Well, you've got someone like Dr. Rhonda Patrick.
Okay.
She's a biomedical scientist.
Okay.
And she's been on the show 9 times.
9 times.
She's a huge advocate for, like, the importance of diet and exercise for overall health.
Oh, that's great.
And longevity.
So he's got, like, a real expert on for that.
A real expert.
That's really cool.
And then you have someone like Post Malone.
Post Malone, what was that like?
Well, it was really interesting. Yeah, he opened up about his struggles with fame.
Yeah.
And mental health.
Wow.
So it gave listeners, like, a really personal look at him.
Behind the music, yeah.
Behind the music, exactly.
That's cool.
And it was a good reminder that, even global superstars, they deal with real life stuff.
Yeah, they're still human.
They're human. They're not just these untouchable figures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can see how those kinds of conversations would really resonate with people.
Oh, yeah.
It makes celebrities seem much more relatable.
Humanizes them.
Humanizes them, yeah.
For sure.
All right, who else?
Well, there's Sonny's.
Sonny Time.
He's the host of the best ever food review show on YouTube.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah, it's a great show.
He goes all over the world.
He does.
Trying all this amazing food.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And, he had a really difficult childhood.
Oh, wow.
But he became this successful food reviewer.
That's inspiring.
It is really inspiring.
Like, no matter what life throws at you, You can follow your dreams.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah.
And, just like all these different guests.
From all walks of life.
From all walks of life, yeah.
It really adds to the show, I think.
It does. It does.
And, I think we can't talk about Joe Rogan without talking about the controversies.
Oh, yeah, there have been a few.
There have been a few.
Yeah.
And, I think it'll be interesting to explore how those controversies have shaped public perception of him.
Okay, let's get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. So, moving on to the controversies.
To the controversies, all right? It's true. Joe Rogan is, a really complex figure.
Oh, yeah?
He sparks such strong feelings from both sides,
People either love him or hate him, it seems like.
It seems that way, yeah.
And I think his willingness to, interview people with all sorts of viewpoints has definitely played into that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you've got people calling him, a gateway drug to misinformation.
Oh.
And then others are saying he's a champion of free speech.
It's wild. Those are such extreme positions.
They are. They really are.
So, how do we even make sense of that?
Well, it's worth noting that Rogan himself has admitted to making mistakes,
Oh, okay.
He said he wants to be more careful.
About what he says?
About the information he shares on his platform.
So he's aware of the influence he has?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And he's even acknowledged that. He's not a doctor.
Right.
He's not a scientist.
So people shouldn't take everything he says as, gospel.
Exactly.
Okay, so he knows he has this power, right? Mm-hmm. This influence. Yeah. But does that actually translate into, responsible platforming?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because, he's given a voice to some really controversial figures.
He's had Alex Jones on.
Jones, yeah.
And, Robert Malone.
Robert Malone, the vaccine skeptic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those interviews, those caused a lot of backlash.
They did. They were incredibly controversial.
Yeah.
But, I think they also sparked some important discussions.
About what?
About things like, where do we draw the line with free speech?
Oh, right.
And, the dangers of misinformation.
Which are very real these days.
Oh, absolutely.
And how important critical thinking is.
So important.
Especially now with, information overload.
Yeah, we're bombarded with information all the time.
All the time, yeah.
It's tough to sort through it all.
So it's like this double-edged sword, right?
It is.
Where giving a voice to, dissenting views can be really valuable.
Yeah.
But it can also be risky if those views are, not based on facts.
Right, exactly.
Or if they're harmful.
So where does that leave us as listeners?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, I think it really highlights the responsibility that we all have.
As listeners.
As listeners,
yeah.
To be active listeners, not just passive consumers of information.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we can't just accept everything we hear, right?
Yeah, right.
Especially from someone with a platform as big as Rogan's.
Right.
We have to be critical thinkers.
Okay.
Questioning assumptions, evaluating the evidence.
Doing our own research, basically.
Exactly. Seeking out multiple perspectives.
Because it's easy to just, believe what we share.
It is, especially if it's coming from someone we like.
Right. Someone we
Or someone who's, really entertaining.
Yeah.
And Rogan is definitely entertaining.
Oh, for sure.
But, it's important to remember that he's also just a guy.
Right. With his own opinions and biases.
Exactly.
And, Rogan has said that he tries to have guests on who represent, a wide range of viewpoints.
He does. He's had everyone on, from scientists and academics.
Oh, wow.
To, athletes and comedians, musicians.
Spiritual gurus.
Even spiritual gurus, yeah. So he's not just sticking to one side of things.
Which is good, because it exposes his listeners to, different ways of thinking.
Exactly.
And it helps them, form their own opinions.
Yeah, it helps them understand complex issues.
Right.
Because, let's face it, most of these issues aren't black and white.
They're very nuanced.
They're very nuanced, yeah.
But even with that variety of guests, some people argue that he gives too much weight to certain viewpoints.
Right, and those viewpoints often align with his own beliefs.
So it's like he's not always totally objective.
It's true, and that's a fair criticism.
So it's this tricky balance, right?
It is.
Between, fostering open dialogue.
Yeah.
But also being mindful of, the consequences.
Of amplifying certain ideas.
Exactly.
Which can be harmful.
And that kind of brings us to another question, right?
Okay, what's that?
Can we separate the art from the artist?
Oh, that's a good one.
Should we hold public figures accountable for their views and actions?
Even if we enjoy their work.
Yeah, even if we enjoy their work.
It's a debate that's been going on forever.
It has.
But it feels really relevant today.
Because, like, the lines between entertainment and news
and social commentary
are so blurred now.
They're so blurred.
Yeah.
So take Rogan, for example.
Okay.
He's super entertaining.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
But should we just overlook
some of his more problematic views?
Just because we like his podcast.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is tough.
There are no easy answers.
But it's a conversation we need to have.
I think so.
Especially when we're talking about someone like Rogan.
Who has such a huge reach.
He's a cultural phenomenon.
He really is.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah. What's next for Joe Rogan?
What does the future hold for the Joe Rogan experience?
The million-dollar question.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's hard to say for sure, you know?
Yeah.
But I think it's safe to say that his influence isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, he's not going away anytime soon. Even though his Spotify deal isn't exclusive anymore.
Right, but it still shows his power.
Yeah.
And the reach of his platform.
But with that much reach, with that much power, comes a lot of responsibility.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, as his audience grows and it's becoming more diverse, the stakes get higher. He's going to have to navigate
all these challenges.
Yeah. Misinformation, platforming diverse viewpoints responsibly.
Oh, yeah. And the world is becoming more and more polarized.
It is. It's crazy.
So it sounds like we, as listeners,
have a role to play.
We do.
Yeah.
We need to be active in all of this.
Absolutely.
Engaging critically with the content, seeking out different perspectives.
And holding both Rogan and ourselves accountable
for the information we consume.
Yes, exactly.
Really.
It's an ongoing conversation, really.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, it's a journey.
Of discovery.
Discovery and dialogue.
And now, it's time to wrap up his deep dive with a final question for you to consider.
Right. I like it.
Okay, so we're back. And man, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have, haven't we? It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, exploring the whole world of Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan and the Joe Rogan experience.
I mean, from his early days.
Stand-up, taekwondo.
Taekwondo, yeah, who knew?
To this, podcasting empire he's built.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It really is.
And all the different topics he talks about.
Oh, yeah, from comedy to psychedelics.
To politics, it's all over the map.
Which I think is part of what makes it so interesting,
Yeah, definitely. You never know what you're going to get.
And, of course, we talked about the controversies, too.
Right, because I mean, you can't talk about Joe Rogan without acknowledging that.
Absolutely not. They're part of the story.
So I think I think it's safe to say that Joe Rogan...
He's a force.
He's a force, yeah.
In the media landscape.
Yeah.
And his influence is undeniable.
Absolutely.
But as we've been discussing, with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly, and it's something to think about.
It is.
So, as promised, we wanted to leave you with a final thought.
A final question?
A final question, yeah. Something to ponder.
To ponder, exactly.
With Rogan's latest Spotify deal no longer being exclusive.
Interesting.
Right. So it's not just on Spotify anymore.
It's out in the wild.
Do you think that's going to, increase his influence?
Ooh, good question.
Or diminish it?
I mean, it could go either way, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's hard to predict.
It is.
But I think no matter what, the Joe Rogan experience...
It's here to stay.
It's a phenomenon.
It is, for sure.
So what do you think?
Well, I think we all have a role to play in how this unfolds.
Oh, absolutely. As listeners, as critical thinkers.
And engaged citizens.
Right. We all need to stay curious. Keep asking questions.
And most importantly...
keep those conversations going.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to talk about these things.
Even if they're difficult.
Even if they're difficult.
That's where the real growth happens.
It is. It is.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Into the world of Joe Rogan.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. It has.
And we hope you learned something new.
Or maybe even just, started thinking about things a little differently.
That's all we can ask.
That's all we can ask, yeah.
Until next time.
Stay curious out there.